today we're talking about the basics of literature review. Reviewing the literature is something that all students must do um, before they finish their dissertation, and it's one of the stages that most gets my students. They know that they need to read about a topic, and they read a lot of papers. Many times they read a lot of papers, and many times also they don't know what to do with that, so they get a little bit lost and confused on how to go about the literature review, which is something that I hope today will be clearer to you. So what we will discuss in this video is what literature review is and what it is not, some common mistakes and characteristics of a good literature review. Spoiler alert, the entire idea behind this video can be summarized into this, which is a literature review is supposed to help you answer your research question based on what we already know, what has been already studied. So, in fact, all the stages of all the chapters in your work should address the research question in any way, right? You're telling a story, and the refrain of the story is the research question. So, in this element as well, we are trying to answer the research question. Many times, what we get from the literature review is the more likely outcome for the questions that we are asking in our work, right? So if you have a general research question, you will have like sub-questions or objectives, and we will most likely get like the more probable answers, and we call that hypothesis, the things that we will end up testing in our work. So why do we do literature reviews? So first of all, we want to distinguish what has been done and what needs to be done, right? What's the thing we don't know. We want to discover important variables that are relevant to the topic. We want to synthesize and gain new perspectives. So this problem has been addressed in this specific way. Can we address it in a different one? Is it possible to think about this in a different way, shed light in a different area of the problem so that we can find different solutions? The literature review also serves to identify relationship between ideas and practices, establishing the context of the topic or problem, and really important to rationalize the significance of the problem. Of course, we want to find a new thing that nobody has studied, but if it's not relevant, why would people waste time reading your dissertation? Why? Finding the right question, or at least establishing the relevance and significance of your question, is really important. It also serves to enhance and acquire subject vocabulary, understanding the structure of the problem or the subject, relating ideas to theories and applications, and this is a nice cherry on top, which is to help you identify the research strategies, techniques, methodologies that have been used. Sometimes we think of a really novel way to address a problem, and it's good to try to investigate why has no one thought of this. Is it that we had a really good idea that's original, or is it that other people have tried and it didn't work for a specific reason that we might want to be aware of? So it's really good. And then placing the research in historical context to show familiarity with state-of-the-art developments. So we want to make sure that it's clear that we know what we're talking about, we have read the literature, we're not going to do something that's redundant, that has been done before or proven to be silly. We're not wasting anyone's time, and we're addressing a really important issue. Okay? So the literature review is when we want to understand, and then of course explain to the reader, what has been done, studied, what is known about this topic. So we want to, one, clearly define the topic and report what different authors have thought about it. Okay, is the definition of this construct super clean cut, or are different perspectives on this? In social sciences, anyone that picks up on a topic thinks of a definition, so it is what it is. So we should try to, show the nuance of the topic. Note what different authors have found about what influences this variable or not. So if you're studying job satisfaction, what are the antecedents of job satisfaction? What are the consequences of job satisfaction? Why does this matter? What are the relationships that we know of, right? So If you're studying the relationship between two variables, has this study been studied before? What were the main findings? And when you clarify the general aspects, then we want to go to the specifics. If you're studying job satisfaction and life satisfaction in the healthcare context, do we know something about job satisfaction and life satisfaction in the healthcare context? Are there specificities that we should be aware of? So this is also important to have in your literature review. And finally, don't forget that hypotheses are often interwoven into text to show that they are based in previous findings. Hypotheses are the more likely answers, or the things we believe we will find in our work that we will test for, right? So they should be supported in the literature, and ideally, if you can, put them in context in the literature review. Common phrases. For example, we're talking about job satisfaction and life satisfaction. They are related in this way, in this study, and they also found that blah, blah, blah. Thus, we propose that. H1, and then you explain H1. Once you have your topic, the literature review is good for many things, including showing your familiarity with the given topic scientifically, developing a theoretical framework and a research methodology, positioning yourself relatively to different voices addressing the issue, and showing how the research you're conducting meets a certain gap in the literature. Think about if you are having a conversation with someone for a really long time and you have explored many things, and then this new person comes along and they start blurting out opinions. If they don't show you that they know what you've been talking about and that they are familiar with your conversation, it's less likely that you will be open to their opinions, because you've been working on this for a really long time. So this person shows out of the blue and starts giving ideas or opinions. It might be harder for you to accept that they have any legitimacy to do so. So one of the reasons why we do literature review is also to show that we know what has been talked about before, and we are providing a novel approach that will meet a certain gap, will help contribute to a problem. What the literature review is not. So we are getting to the common mistakes part. So first of all, it is not a copy and paste of different paragraphs from scientific papers or a list of definitions. This is a not so uncommon mistake. Okay, so people know that they need to define the constructs, and they need to be sourced in literature. So a lot of the time, or it's not uncommon to have literature reviews that have a lot of citations. Even if you cite them properly, if you have 2 pages of citations, it doesn't really show that you know what you're talking about, right? So it's important for the reader to listen to your voice, so to speak. So you should write as if you were explaining the topic to someone, It should be like you're having a conversation in a way. It should not be a statement of unrelated facts or an information dump that has no narrative or logical sequence. So even if you find really interesting facts, if it doesn't fit your narrative, if it doesn't help to tell your story, find a different outlet for them. Make a post or write a newspaper article or start another paper, It can be an idea for different research. But it should not be a dump. It should be a story that you're telling. It should also not be an essay of your personal opinion on a given topic or a personal chronicle about the topic. It's not to say that you can't give your opinion. It's to say that in the literature review, what you're trying to do is to find what other people have found about this topic. What do we already know about this that has come out from other studies? Okay? And by the way, it's like what Susan Sontag said, a photograph is always the opinion of the photographer on a given subject. So the way you create the argument, the points you make come across, the ideas that you share and how you frame the subject, they are all part of what you think about the issue, right? So you don't need to say my opinion is, because this is not the place for that. It also should not have like personal anecdotes on a topic in general. This is always in general. I can think of really specific snippets of exceptions here, but in general, you're not supposed to share your experiences in the literature review. You're supposed to explain what has been studied before and what we already know about the topic. How has this been addressed, and so on, and so on. So, other common mistakes. One, the researcher does not clearly relate the findings of the literature to the reviewers, to the researcher's own study. You need to make sure that it's super clear what does the research that you are mentioning have to do with your own work. It doesn't take sufficient time to define the best descriptors and identify the best sources to use in the review literature that's related to one's topic. I have been in a jury where one of the discussants mentioned that his first thing that he checked was the reference list and to see if the person had used top tier journals or not. It's not something that I personally do as a discussant, but I found it interesting. So make sure to take time to see if you are mentioning like the key studies that you are that you have like really credible sources, really good not news, really good journals, and so on. Relies on secondary sources rather than on primary sources in reviewing the literature. Yesterday I was revising this dissertation, and the the most repeated comment from me was, please go read the original paper, because this person had put in so many cite in. If it's good enough to be cited in and you have access to the paper, go read it. See if the person who has cited it correctly. Imagine that the person forgot to write not, so they say this does have a relationship and it does not. So go check it. Number 4 is uncritically accepts another researcher's finding and interpretations as valid rather than examining critically all aspects of the research, design, and analysis. So if I were to tell you that job satisfaction is mostly defined by genetic characteristics and biochemical reactions intrinsic to the subjects, you should at least try to find out, why am I saying this, right? So you shouldn't set aside my opinion because it's completely different from what you've been reading, but you should also not accept it uncritically. So why am I saying this? Did I do a study on genetic characteristics of workers? Did I just write an opinion paper on this? So it can be added into your, if you find that the results have some, are solid, they have some ground to it, you can add it as a nuance, but you shouldn't either reject or accept uncritically what you read. You should look into it to see if it makes sense. It's like, if you buy a wrinkle cream and it says 90% of women found results after 2 weeks, and then you look at the clinical study, it's like 12 women that have tried this cream. So it helps you put things into perspective. So number 5 is something that I'm often guilty of. Does not report the search procedures that were used in literature review. And actually, a lot of researchers are guilty of this. We don't always explain how we collected the papers that we are funding, that we are using to support our work, unless it's like systematic literature review. But of course, all research should be possible to replicate. So if you can, add it. Reports isolated statistical results rather than synthesizing them, and does not consider contrary findings and alternative interpretations in synthesizing quantitative literature. So ideally, we want to have a literature review that really helps you understand the issue that you are tackling and understand also different nuances. In social sciences, it's very rare to have something that's very straightforward. So we want to know the different pitfalls and different opinions on a specific topic. So now that we addressed not quality criteria, common mistakes, we are in the last slides of this presentation. We're talking about quality criteria for your literature review. So 1, The literature review should be easy to read, well structured, and be very clear. The clearer it is, the better, the simpler it reads, the more transparent its purpose, the better your work. Sometimes we feel like if we don't do like complicated writing that makes us sound super smart and erudite, it's because we're not doing a good job, and I would argue it's the exact opposite. If things get complex, it's because the constructs are abstract and they are not straightforward. It should not be because you're making the reader's life harder. You should do exactly the opposite. And often, I very often suggest to my students to use tables and figures in the literature review exactly to help them make the text more approachable, easier to read. So, a good literature review should consider the credibility of its sources. It should include seminal papers as well as more recent papers. I usually suggest to my students that at least 80% of the work should be from the last 5 to 10 years, from like journals that are reputable and so on, and up to 20% can be textbooks and seminal work. This is just a rule of thumb. Follow it if you want or not. It's just what I usually tell my students to do. And last but not least, it should be insightful. So you should feel, when you are done reading, you shouldn't feel like a whole lot of information has been dumped on you. You should feel like you heard a story. You took a walk in a park and you learned about this and this and this, and it all makes sense in the end. So this is my general suggestion. It's really not so different from making really good notes from a class. So when you have, if you have a best friend that couldn't attend the class, or if you couldn't attend the class and you have a best friend who takes really good notes, usually the notes don't transcribe directly what the teacher said. They will condense the information and they will make it easy for you to understand it, right? So it summarizes well the shared knowledge. It's not a transcript. This is the same with the literature review. It's not going to give you everything you read in the papers. It's going to give you what matters for your topic, for your question. They often include connections that were not made originally in the lecture, but make so much sense to you and your colleagues. So they will connect the topics with another course that you're having, or with the story that you know, that will help the other person really understand better the topic or remember it, and the teacher couldn't think of it because they have a different context. So in the literature review, this also happens. You're supposed to create connections to help the reader understand really well the ideas that you're sharing or the concepts that you are trying to connect. Sometimes they include figures and tables that really clear up the connections. I usually suggest to my students that when they are defining a problem or a construct that's important for the text, I often suggest that they create a table with definitions and the authors and then the year, and then they comment on that table. Because when you're explaining something to a colleague and you are citing something that someone else said, it's often as a basis to comment for something else. So I usually suggest my students to do this. They include meta-allusions, so metacognitive takes on the class, and this is something that's really valuable because you're reading a lot of papers. It's like, so in the context of note-taking, it's when, for example, the teacher seems really excited about a specific part of the class that they're explaining. So in the notes you underline that, and you can even make a comment saying that the teacher seemed really keen on this idea, so that you know that you need to maybe look more into it or be more aware of it when you write an answer in a text or in an essay or whatever. Or for example, if the teacher said this will be in the test, right? It's not part of the content of the class per se, but it's relevant information. So in the literature review, this would be like, you can comment on things that are not completely obvious, but they jump out to you. For example, you notice that most studies on a specific topic are qualitative, or most authors mention blah blah blah. Most studies are done with students and not with workers, or there's a specific population that seems to be more prevalent in the study. So this can help shed light on the topic that you wouldn't find from a different perspective. So, some final thoughts. The most important thing in the literature review is the quality of the insights it produces. What did it teach us? What new perspectives, connections, comparisons, and implications did it bring to light? We want the literature review to be the bedrock of the study. So we wanted to help us define the variables that we are working with. We wanted to help us understand how these variables work alone or with each other or in the context that we are working. And we want the literature review to give us the hypothesis we're going to test. A really good literature review will give you insights that are new, perspectives that are new. Okay, but if this stresses you out, focus on the operational elements. Great. Define really well your constructs. Make sure that you explain really well what has been studied about those constructs in the last 5 to 10 years that relate with your question, of course, always. Um, and what are the more likely answers that we will find? Okay, if you try to do this in a really concise way, it's already excellent. The most important thing, written in Portuguese because autocorrect, is the author's sense-making ability. So your ability to make sense of the information is really what's at stake here. That will define what kind of literature review you're going to do. I don't mean to be encouraging, but really, literature review is not one and done. You end up doing literature review throughout all the stages of the work. So the first stage of the work, you will do literature review because you want to know the variables you're going to study, you want to know how to address the issue, the topic, what instruments to use, but really you end up reading throughout your entire work. And it's not impossible to reach the end of the work and you think, oh, I should have put a different variable here, or I could have tackled the problem in a different way. If that happens, put it in future research. Da-da-da-da, solved. Okay? So I hope this video was useful for you. There's a handout in the description of this video. Enjoy and let me know if you have any questions or doubts. Bye-bye.